You're here again. Another night when sleep keeps its distance. Not for lack of trying. You've dimmed the lights, set the phone to night mode, maybe even made tea. But your mind still won't let go. It's not just that you're awake. It's that you're tired. Bone tired. Soul tired. In that quiet, heavy way that doesn't always show on the outside. Your thoughts spin with things you didn't say, or things you wish you could unsay. Or maybe it's something simpler, a to-do list that rewrites itself every time you close your eyes. Maybe you've been holding too much for too long. Grief, maybe. Loneliness that no one sees. Or just a thrum of anxiety that hums under everything, soft but relentless. If your brain won't settle, if your body feels like it forgot how to sleep, you're safe here. You can rest without needing to succeed at it. Let's go somewhere else for a little while. Somewhere slower, stranger, much smellier. Let's slip back in time, not to castles and kings, not to battles and legends, but to something far more humble, more human. Let's talk about going to the bathroom. In the Middle Ages, yes, really, forget indoor plumbing, forget toilet paper, forget private stalls and flush handles and air fresheners named Meadow Breeze. This is about a world where you shared a wooden bench with a hole over a river while making small talk with neighbors. You open your eyes to find yourself in the dim chill of a medieval morning. A gray sky glows faintly outside the tiny window, just a hole really cut into a stone wall. You're wrapped in a rough wool blanket, curled on a straw-stuffed mattress that rustles every time you move. Nature is calling. There's no bathroom down the hall, no porcelain, no plumbing. You groan, roll to the side, and pull on yesterday's tunic. It's stiff in places. You try not to think about why. The air is cold, stone cold. Your breath shows in little puffs. You step outside, boots scraping on the uneven ground. A chicken gives you a judgmental side-eye. In the village center, there's a wooden building that leans a little too far to the left. That's the privy, or the guardrobe, or maybe it's just a hole in a board above a ditch. You enter. It's an experience. The smell hits first. Then the sound water below, trickling faintly. Then the texture of the wooden seat worn smooth by countless strangers. You sit. You think about your life. You try not to make eye contact with the rat across the floorboard gap. It squeaks. You nod politely. There's no toilet paper, but there is moss, or maybe a sponge. You will not be asking questions. And as strange as this all feels, it's completely normal for this time for these people. This was daily life, unremarkable, unspoken, utterly human. And somehow, that makes it beautiful, because the truth is even in the most romanticized eras of history. Everyone still had to go. If this gentle journey is helping you slow down, helping your thoughts soften at the edges, feel free to like, or subscribe, only if it adds calm to your evening. Where are you right now? Are you curled on your side? Blanket tucked up to your chin? Are you staring at the ceiling, waiting for your brain to stop narrating? Are you just here for company because silence felt too loud? Whatever the reason, I'm glad you're here. Take a deep breath. Exhale slowly. Let your jaw unclench. Drop your shoulders. Feel your body melt just a little further into whatever is holding you up. Tonight's story isn't about kings or knights. It's about ordinary people doing extraordinarily ordinary things. So much more relatable. So much more real. Let's begin. Hey guys, tonight we're starting our journey in the most humble of places. Not a battlefield, not a banquet hall, not even a monastery full of chanting monks, but in a cold stone room with straw on the floor and a pressing need in your belly that absolutely will not wait until sunrise. You are a medieval villager or noble or monk. It doesn't really matter. The sun's not up, your bones are stiff, and your bladder has declared war. There's no bathroom, no pipes, no warm seat, only darkness, silence, and the subtle horror of remembering what your options are. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit up slowly on your creaky wooden bed. The mattress is stuffed with straw, and mice might be sleeping under it, but you don't have time to worry about them. The chamber is dark and cold. Your breath puffs out in little clouds. The walls are stone, there are no windows, just a tiny slit high above you to let in a bit of light when morning comes. For now, there's only the flicker of the coals in the hearth and your desperate internal dialogue about how much longer you can hold it. You swing your legs over the side and search the floor with your feet. No slippers, of course not. You feel the rush of icy air the second your soles touch the cold stone. You flinch. You squint. And then, there it is, your salvation in the shape of a squat ceramic bowl, known as a chamber pot. It's not beautiful. It's not fragrant. It might be cracked. But it's here. And in this moment, you love it more than life itself. You shuffle over to it like it's a holy relic. This is how millions of people relieved themselves in the Middle Ages. Chamber pots under beds, beside hearths, or tucked behind curtains. No plumbing, no flushing, just a vessel and a prayer. And if you're lucky, it's empty. If not, well, you don't have time to negotiate. You squat over it awkwardly. You listen to the faint echo of liquid hitting ceramic. You try not to think about the fact that someone in your household probably has to empty this later. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's a servant. Maybe it's someone whose entire job is carrying other people's waste to the nearest dumping site. And yes, that's a real thing. In castles, they had servants who carried full chamber pots to the garderobes, basically holes in the wall that dropped waste straight down into the moat or pit below. If you lived in a town or village, you might empty it into the street and hope the rain washed it away. Or you'd bring it to a shared dung heap at the edge of town where things went to ferment and feed the pigs. Historians still argue whether chamber pots were cleaned with water, vinegar ashes, or just left until they got too disgusting to use. Some nobles had beautifully decorated ones. Some monks had plain clay. Some people didn't even have one and just squatted in a corner on a piece of cloth. You finish your business and replace the lid if it has one. If not, you push it gently under the bed and pretend it's not there. The room still smells like smoke and wool and hay, but now there's a new note in the air, something sharper. You pull the covers over your head and try to sleep again. But now you're thinking about the fact that everyone else in the house probably has one, too. You remember that in wealthier homes, chamber pots could be made of brass or pewter or even silver, because nothing says sophistication like urinating into precious metals. Some had inscriptions carved into them. A popular one in Latin translates to, "Be gentle, dear friend, and do not spill me." Poetic, functional, slightly tragic. In inns you might share a pot with strangers. In monasteries they were passed silently from one hand to the next during the night. In cities they were sometimes thrown out the window with a warning cry like "Guard low," which means watch out for the water, but really meant duck before you're drenched in sewage. It's from phrases like this that we get the word Lou. You lie there listening to the creaking of the building, the occasional cough, the shuffle of someone else waking up to face their own bladder problems. You wonder how something so private could be so public back then. And the truth is that privacy wasn't really a thing in medieval life. If you had a curtain, you were lucky. If you had your own space, you were rich. And if you had plumbing, well, you were probably dreaming. You drift off again, finally, as the sky begins to pale. The air is no warmer. The pot is still under your bed. But at least for now, the need has passed. You've made it through the night without slipping, tripping, or spilling anything horrifying. And in the medieval world, that's basically a small miracle. You're not exactly excited to wake up, but at least you're not waking up in an emergency this time. Your body is calm. Your bladder is empty. You sit up slowly in the pale light of dawn and glance over at the chamber pot under your bed. Still there. Still a silent, awkward roommate in your living quarters. You don't want to look inside. You don't want to smell it. But you do want it gone. And here begins the next chapter of your medieval bathroom adventure, the art of disposal. You pick it up carefully. You've done this before. The sides are smooth but slightly sticky. Your fingers stick faintly where others have gripped it in the night. You hold it out in front of you like it's a sacred object with unholy contents. And it is. Now, where does it go? If you're in a common house in a medieval village, there's probably a shared dumping place behind the house. A trench, maybe. A hole. A pit of some sort. Not too close to the garden, not too far from the door, just far enough away that you don't have to think about it until the wind shifts. You step outside, the air sharp and damp. Chickens scuttle away. Someone's already feeding the goats. You nod politely, pot in hand, trying to pretend it's full of soup or milk or anything other than what it contains. They don't say anything. Everyone's done this. Everyone knows. You dump it. It splashes. You flinch. This is the moment when people throughout the centuries have realized just how unromantic history really is. There's no ye olde glamour here, just human need and gravity. Now, if you lived in a castle, you might have had a garderobe, a fancy French word for what was essentially a toilet closet, stone seat, hole in the bottom. Everything dropped down into a chute built into the outer wall of the castle, sometimes straight into the moat, sometimes into a cesspit that had to be cleaned by someone with an iron stomach and a short lifespan. But even the garderobe wasn't safe. During sieges, attackers would sometimes climb up the waste chutes into the castle. Let that sink in. Someone willingly crawled through human waste to try and stab a duke. That's either bravery or desperation, or both. Historians still argue whether chamber pots were routinely washed or just wiped and reused. Some were rinsed in the same river where people washed clothes and bodies and fish guts. Others were emptied into cesspits, dug deep behind homes. Over time, those cesspits became archaeological gold mines, full of pottery fragments, lost buttons, and occasionally bones. People really did throw everything down there. Back to you. Your pot is empty now. You rinse it in a barrel of rainwater, trying not to breathe too deeply. Then you carry it back inside like it's not the grossest thing you've touched today. You place it gently under your bed. Ready for round 2 tonight. But now you're thinking about precision. Because medieval life didn't just involve going in a pot, it involved not missing. And there was no toilet paper to clean up accidents. Which means accuracy was a skill, especially at night, especially in the dark. Especially when your chamber was crowded and the floor was uneven and your cousin slept 1 foot away from your chamber pot. Some families used curtains around beds to keep out cold drafts and preserve dignity. But there was nothing dignified about being woken by the sound of someone knocking over a half-full pot, the splash, the shriek, the shame, and of course the cleanup, which involved straw rags and silently pretending it wasn't your fault. You remember hearing of one household where the chamber pot was shared by 6 people. They had a schedule, a literal pot rotation. You never thought you'd envy a modern bathroom until now. You lie back on your bed and glance up at the wooden ceiling beams stained by years of smoke and oil lamps. Life here is simple but never easy. Nothing is automated. Everything is deliberate. You relieve yourself, you clean it, you carry it, you repeat, and at the center of it all, the humble chamber pot. not glamorous, not refined, but absolutely essential. You drift toward sleep again, knowing that soon you'll be back outside, refilling water, helping with meals, maybe digging a new trench for waste runoff if you're lucky. You try not to think about how close your food and your waste live in this world. There's no separation here, just layers of daily necessities stacked on top of one another. But for now, you're clean, you're warm, you're not holding anything that sloshes. That's progress. There's a certain kind of person you don't want to be in the medieval world. You don't want to be a leper. You don't want to be a criminal chained to the stocks. And you definitely don't want to be the person whose job it is to empty chamber pots for a living. But someone has to do it. Because, as you may have noticed by now, everyone in the Middle Ages goes to the bathroom. But no one wants to deal with what comes after. And so enters the night soil man. You hear the cart before you see it. Wooden wheels groaning under the weight of sloshing barrels. The man at the reins is hunched, wrapped in layers that are stained and stiff. The smell arrives long before he does. It rolls through the alleys like fog, curling under doorways, slipping into windows left cracked for air. He whistles. That's your cue. You step outside with your chamber pot, emptied, yes, but still crusted with the memory of last night's effort. He doesn't say a word, just nods. He carries a long-handled bucket, a scraping paddle, and a look that suggests he's seen things no one should see. He takes your pot, rinses it in the barrel strapped to his cart, and hands it back without making eye contact. This man is your sanitation system. In big cities like London or Paris, entire teams of nightmen worked under cover of darkness. They'd collect human waste from chamber pots, cesspits, and makeshift latrines, haul it out of town and dump it in designated waste fields, or worse, into the river. Some cities used the waste as fertilizer. Some buried it. Others didn't care what happened as long as it disappeared. Historians still argue whether these men were considered necessary heroes or simply tolerated with a grimace. In truth, it was both. They were paid well, sometimes better than skilled tradesmen, but few envied them. Their work was dangerous. Cesspits could collapse. Gases could suffocate. And worst of all, sometimes they'd fall in. There's a recorded case in 1326 of a man in London who drowned in human waste while attempting to repair a broken privy shaft. He slipped. He suffocated, and his body was recovered 2 days later by a very unlucky team of rescuers. This wasn't rare. You look at the nightman again. He's moving to the next house now, collecting more pots, scraping the contents into a massive wooden tub. He moves with the tired grace of someone who doesn't have the luxury of disgust anymore. You wonder if he smells it, or if his nose has simply given up. In castles and monasteries, there were other solutions. Monks used covered passages to carry waste to large pits behind the cloisters. Nobles had servants whose sole task was to carry chamber pots to the guardrobe towers. Some were euphemistically called grooms of the stool, which sounds dignified until you remember they were responsible for wiping their lord's bottom. Yes, really. You return your pot inside. The nightman disappears into the mist, his cart creaking like a ghost wagon rolling over cobblestones. Inside, you light a small lamp with a sputtering wick and glance at the walls. They're stained from years of smoke, just like your hands, your clothes, your ceiling. Everything here smells faintly of fire and earth and waste. You try to get used to it. You mostly succeed. Someone down the street shouts, "A cart's overturned." It's not the nightman's, but the sound of something sloshing tells you it was carrying waste too. A few muffled groans follow. Then silence. You sit back on your straw mattress, the pot now clean, or clean enough tucked back into its corner. You wonder if tomorrow it will be full again. You know the answer. You lie back. The smell clings to your clothes, your nails, your thoughts. You try not to let it follow you into your dreams, but even as you drift off, the creak of the cart and the whistle of the nightman echo softly behind your eyes. It's not glamorous. It's not heroic. But it's medieval life, and someone always has to clean the pot. The next time you feel the urge, it's the middle of the day, and you're not at home. You're in town. In a marketplace, to be exact. The stalls are crowded. Fish scales glitter in the sunlight. A goat chews on someone's cloak. Children run barefoot through puddles that are suspiciously warm. You try not to think about it, and then your stomach twists. That very particular twist. You know it instantly. You need to go. Soon. You glance around. There is no sign that says toilet. There's no arrow pointing toward comfort. There's certainly no cafe where you can pretend to be a customer just long enough to sneak off. This is medieval urban life. You are on your own, but you're not the first to face this crisis. You remember something, the public latrines. You walk quickly, too quickly, dodging carts and chickens until you find it. A small stone building tucked behind a row of homes. Low roof, no windows. A line of worn steps leading down into shadow. You hesitate, then descend. The smell hits you immediately. It's damp, sour, like mold and vinegar, and something that might once have been soup. You squint through the gloom. Inside there's a long stone bench, carved openings spaced along it. Beneath a channel of water trickling past, slow and dark. You try not to think about where it's going, or where it's been. You take your place on the bench. It's cold, very cold. You shift uncomfortably. There's no door, no privacy, just a faint screen of carved wood between you and the next person, who is, of course, already sitting there, nodding politely. It's a strange thing sharing a bathroom without walls, but this was normal. In many medieval cities, public latrines were communal, built by municipalities or monasteries. Men and women sometimes shared them, sometimes not. It depended on the town, the decade, and how badly everyone needed to go. Some latrines were surprisingly advanced. Flowing water carried waste away. Rainwater was diverted to rinse the stone. In monasteries, there were multi-seat arrangements with drainage channels and even rudimentary ventilation. If you were lucky, it worked. If you weren't well, you tried to go quickly. Historians still debate how often these latrines were cleaned. Some were regularly maintained by public workers. Others became health hazards, so overrun with filth that they were simply abandoned and replaced. In London, one latrine near the Thames had a row of 30 seats, an entire choir of discomfort. You finish your business as fast as humanly possible, then look around for something, anything, to wipe with. There is nothing soft, no stack of linen, no roll of parchment, just a small pile of moss and a smooth, flat stick. You sigh, you choose the moss, you do what you must. You leave quickly, stepping back into the light like someone emerging from the underworld. You breathe deeply. The air smells like fish and smoke and burning bread, but it's heaven compared to the latrine. You make a silent vow to eat less cheese, just in case. Back at the market, life continues. No one looks at you. No one knows what you've just endured. Everyone here has been there. Everyone here will be again. As you pass a corner, you see a different kind of public toilet, a barrel, just sitting against a wall. No seat, no screen, just there. It's a urinal for men, positioned for ease, emptied at the end of the day sometimes, usually not. You walk faster. You understand now why medieval cities were obsessed with smell. The stench of the streets was legendary. Officials passed laws banning waste dumping. Fines were issued. Shovels were employed. None of it really worked, because as long as people lived, ate, and walked these cobbled paths, there would be needs. And as long as there were needs, there would be places like the one you just visited. You make it home later that day exhausted. You clean your hands in ash and cold water. You sip something warm. You look at your chamber pot with a kind of affection. At least it's yours. At least it's familiar. At least you don't have to sit beside a stranger and pretend you're not both thinking about how loud everything sounds in a stone room with no door. You go to bed that night, grateful for walls, for darkness, and for moss that wasn't too dry. There's a special kind of privilege you carry when you live in a castle. You eat better than most. You sleep indoors above ground. You wear fabric that's not constantly damp. But when nature calls, even nobility can't escape the great equalizer. And so you rise one morning in your stone-walled chamber, stretch beneath your heavy wool blankets, and feel it, that telltale pressure. You look to the corner. No chamber pot today. It's been moved, taken scrubbed, who knows. But you have another option. The garderobe. You shuffle to the doorway in your thick linen nightshirt. The floor is cold, your breath puffs out like smoke. A servant nods at you as you pass. You nod back, because dignity must be preserved even now. You reach the garderobe, a narrow windowless closet built into the castle wall. The door creaks. Inside, a single stone seat juts from the wall, worn smooth from years of royal business. Below it, nothing but a dark vertical shaft that drops all the way down the exterior wall of the castle. It's open to the wind and to gravity. You sit, and suddenly you're deeply aware of every draft whistling through the shaft below you. It's like airing out your entire soul. This is bathroom luxury medieval style. And yet, the smell wafts upward with enthusiasm, because that shaft doesn't go away. It accumulates. In theory, waste drops into the moat. In reality, it drops into whatever's below. Sometimes water, sometimes mud, sometimes a pile that's been there too long. Guards walking beneath garderobe chutes wore hoods for a reason. Some castles had multiple garderobes, rows of them, along outside walls, forming what looked like a string of small, unassuming closets. If you were important, you might have one attached to your bedchamber. If not, you shared with everyone. Sometimes lime was tossed down the shaft to cut the odor. Sometimes not. Historians still argue whether castles had regular waste removal crews or if the chutes just overflowed until they were bricked up and replaced. Excavations of ancient keeps have uncovered entire garderobe towers sealed with stone like they were trying to quarantine history itself. You shift slightly. The stone is unforgiving. There's no padding, no comfort. And this is supposed to be noble. You wonder what the peasants are using. Probably a bush, or a ditch, or the same corner of the barn as the animals. A breeze sneaks up the shaft. You shiver. You finish your business quickly, wiping with a scrap of linen that had a previous life, perhaps as part of an undertunic. Everything in a castle is reused, especially cloth. Paper is too precious, and soft leaves are only an option if you're outdoors. You stand, stretch, and close the door behind you. A servant will toss a bucket of water down. Later, or not, the shaft will continue to carry its history downward, one noble visit at a time. You return to your chamber. Someone has placed a small sprig of rosemary near your bed, not for decoration, for the smell. Because while castles may have had stone walls and tapestry-lined halls, they did not smell good. Moats, you now realize, weren't just for defense. They were also open-air sewer systems. That picturesque water feature surrounding the tower, it's a moat filled with rainwater, dead fish, rotting vegetation, and the daily contributions of 100 rear ends. You think about this as you peer out the window. The birds are singing. The sun is rising. A servant is down below, swearing quietly as he steps in something suspicious. You drink your morning broth and stare at the wall tapestry of a unicorn, and all you can think is that unicorn doesn't know how lucky it is. You've been in the castle long enough now to understand a hard truth. The moat is not a swimming pool. It's not romantic. It's not charming. It's not even just a muddy trench with frogs. It is more often than not a literal cesspit, a body of water that collects everything unwanted, unmentionable, and unforgettable. And today you have the misfortune of walking past it. It's a warm afternoon. The sun is shining. The courtyard smells faintly of hay leather and roasted onions. But when you pass the stone archway that leads to the outer wall, the breeze changes, and the smell hits you like a sermon. Moat stench, thick, sour, tangy, in a way that clings to your nose hairs and your dignity. You stop breathing through your nose and continue walking. The moat surrounds the castle, circling it like a loyal but very unclean pet. It's fed by a natural spring or diverted stream. In theory, the water flows. In reality, it often stagnates. And into it drops the daily waste from every garderobe above. It bubbles sometimes. You don't look too closely. You spot a servant nearby, muttering to himself while throwing handfuls of lime into the water. It hisses faintly, mixing with whatever floats just beneath the surface. Pale things, round things, once living things. Maybe kitchen scraps, maybe something else. You nod at the man. He nods back, expression hollow, like someone who no longer dreams. He's standing beneath one of the castle's garderobe chutes. A small overhang juts from the wall above. It looks like a stone balcony for ants. In truth, it's a toilet shaft. Waste falls directly from the seat into the moat below. It's clever, really. The waste is taken away by water, but sometimes the water gives it back. You've heard stories, guards falling into the moat while drunk, servants splashed during sieges. One tale claims a thief tried to sneak into a castle by climbing up through the chute. He didn't make it. The smell alone must have defeated him. Historians still debate how much maintenance moats actually got. Some castles tried to dredge them once a year. Others let nature take its course, which usually meant frogs, mosquitoes, and bacteria so enthusiastic they practically introduced themselves. If you stood near one long enough, your clothes would absorb the smell. You'd carry it back inside like an uninvited guest. Some castles burned herbs in the halls to mask it. Others just accepted it as the scent of power. You watch a goose flap across the moat, trailing greenish ripples behind it. You wonder how anything survives in that water. Then again, medieval life is mostly about surviving in conditions no one should survive. You walk away from the moat quickly. Back in the castle, you pass a corridor where a scribe is copying a prayer by candlelight. The air smells better here, ink wax dust. You breathe deeper. You sit on a bench and shake the smell of the moat from your memory. Someone mentions that the lord of the castle is planning to dine outdoors tomorrow, a feast near the garden. You wonder if he remembers what flows beneath that garden wall. Probably not. Or maybe he just pretends not to know. You once thought castles were glamorous. Now you know they're just very large buildings where people do all the same things, eating, sweating, relieving themselves, but with more echo. You head to your chamber. The chamber pot is there, mercifully empty. You open the narrow window slit to let in fresh air. It works, mostly, but from somewhere below, the wind shifts. And you remember, the moat is always waiting, always watching. always breathing. You're sitting on a log near the edge of the woods when the question strikes you. What did medieval people use to wipe? You've asked a lot of questions in your time: where to sleep, what to eat, how to avoid fleas. But this one lingers, literally, because as much as we like to imagine the grand halls and armored knights, everyone from the lowest peasant to the most powerful king eventually had to answer this basic question. And the answers are creative. You shift slightly, thinking back to your most recent encounter with the castle guardrobe. No cloth was offered, no basket of soft leaves, just the cold stone seat, the open air, and the expectation that you'd bring your own solution. You didn't. But now you know better, so you ask around. The first answer comes from an old man near the kitchen fire. Wool, he says, with the absolute confidence of someone who probably hasn't had access to wool for years. Soft, gentle, absorbent. You thank him. A passing boy snort. Hey, he says as if it's obvious. Grab a handful and hope it doesn't poke. Another woman says, linen scraps, old bandages, worn cloth, anything soft enough to avoid regret. You understand. Desperation makes inventors of everyone. But the most surprising suggestion comes from the brewer's apprentice. He leans in, eyes wide, and whispers, a goose. You blink. A what? He nods solemnly. A live goose, tethered outside. For nobles mostly. You sit, you lift. The goose nips, cleans, done. You stare at him. He's not laughing. Historians still debate whether the goose method was real or satirical. A few scattered texts mention birds in bathroom contexts, but most scholars agree it was likely a joke or a misunderstanding. Still, the image lingers. You find yourself imagining a feathered sanitation assistant honking indignantly as it's pressed into service. You hope it's fiction, for everyone's sake. More commonly, wiping materials included moss leaves, straw, smooth sticks, water-soaked rags, and sometimes even handfuls of snow. In warmer regions, seashells were used, though that method requires more courage than you possess. In monasteries, monks shared a communal wiping rag hung from a hook near the latrines. It was rinsed occasionally, possibly, but it was reused again and again. You try not to think about the logistics. In wealthier homes, cloth strips were provided, used, washed, reused. They might be scented with herbs, rosemary, sage, lavender, not for pleasure but for survival. A perfumed distraction from the reality of medieval sanitation. Toilet paper, as we know it, wouldn't appear in Europe until centuries later. Even then, it was a luxury. For now, wiping was just another moment of improvisation in a life defined by practical discomfort. You remember the moss you used in the public latrine? It was cold, a little damp, but surprisingly soft. Now you find yourself scanning the forest floor with new appreciation. Soft moss, priceless. You reach for a handful, now just to feel it. It crumbles slightly in your fingers, releasing a faint earthy scent. You wonder how many others have sat beneath these same trees, answering the same call, hoping for the same outcome relief without regret. You think about what it must have been like in winter, when everything is frozen, when even your breath snaps in the air. Would you wipe with snow? Would you wipe at all? You don't want to know. Back in town, you hear of one tavern that keeps a rag on a stick in the alley out back. It's not official, not public, but regulars know it's there, hung from a nail, dipped in a bucket, used with grim resignation. You make a mental note never to touch anything in that alley. As you walk through the village square, you realize that every surface, every wall, every cart, every rock has probably been near someone's worst moment. You sit at a bench and think about how far you've come. From fumbling in the dark with a chamber pot to discovering a new respect for moss and linen scraps and geese. You look around. A flock waddles across the road, feathers, fluffed beaks snapping at breadcrumbs. You smile nervously. One honks at you. You take a wide step around it, just in case. The moon is high, but you can't sleep. It's not the cold or the itch in your straw mattress or even the faint creaking of wooden beams overhead. It's that story. The one you heard earlier at the tavern. The one about the man who sat on a public latrine at night and never came back out. You shift under your blanket. You try to forget it. But your bladder has other ideas. You rise quietly, slipping on your cloak. The fire's down to embers. You step outside into the narrow alley behind the inn, where the latrine is supposed to be. It's little more than a wooden box with a hole over a pit. You've seen chamber pots cleaner than this, but it's dark. And suddenly, all you can hear is that story again. He was traveling alone, stopped at a roadside inn, needed to relieve himself during the night, used the outhouse, didn't notice the man hiding beneath the seat. A thief. Or worse, someone who waited in the shadows with a knife. The poor traveler sat down, and the last thing he saw was movement just before something reached up and dragged him down. You pause in front of the outhouse door. It creaks gently in the wind. There's no candle, no torch, just the faint outline of the hole and the smell rich, layered old. You take a breath, push the door open. There's nothing inside. Probably. You do your business quickly, efficiently. You don't sit all the way down. You wipe with the cloth tied to the door handle, trying not to think about how many others have done the same. You finish, step outside, still alive. You exhale, almost laugh. Then you hear something behind you. A scuffle, a breath. You turn fast, but it's just a goat. You think you walk back faster than necessary. Urban legends have always existed, even in the Middle Ages. Historians still debate how much is truth, how much is fear, and how much was a clever way to discourage people from loitering in public latrines. But the records are there. Accounts of people robbed while relieving themselves. Some were attacked. Some were watched. Some simply vanished. Latrines were vulnerable places. No doors, no locks, no privacy. If you were poor, you used what was available. Alleyway buckets, overhanging boards behind the bakery. You went where you had to and hoped no one followed. In towns like Paris or London, nighttime relief was a gamble. You risked pickpockets, rats, drunks, and worse. And if you had no pot, no coin for a tavern seat, no sheltered nook, then the shadows were your only cover. Back in your room, you sit on the edge of the bed, heartbeat slowly returning to normal. The goat is still out there. Or was it? You decide to wait longer next time, at least until the sun rises. The idea of using a public latrine in the daylight seems better somehow, safer. You remember that even some monasteries posted guards near their latrines, not for enemies, but to prevent monks from falling in. The holes were deep, the wood rotted. One wrong step and you were part of the problem permanently. They found one poor soul decades later, bones resting among broken pots and discarded sandals. You lie down again, pulling the blanket up, curling into warmth. You think of all the stories you've heard in the last few days. The moss, the goose, the man in the pit. All reminders that history is made not just in castles and courts, but in alleys and outhouses, in the quiet, necessary moments of being human. Your eyes grow heavy. The wind shifts. You hear the goat bleat softly in the distance. You decide it's best not to wonder too much. You've seen how peasants do it. There are no garderobes out here, no stone chutes, or semi-private latrines with polite little dividers. Out in the countryside, it's just you, the earth, and a polite distance from wherever the food is growing, and that's about it. You're staying on a farm now, a real one. Thatched roof chickens in the yard smoke drifting from a crooked chimney. And on your first morning here, you wake up to a rooster screaming directly into your soul. You sit up, stretch, and once again your bowels remind you that you're a living creature with needs. You ask your host where the privy is. He laughs. Anywhere past the orchard, right? You throw on your shoes, grab a rag, and head out. There's no path, just worn grass and familiar footprints leading away from the house toward a line of trees. It's quiet, damp. You pass a goat. It doesn't make eye contact. You appreciate that. Eventually, you find a hollow between two low bushes. Someone's been here before. A slight depression in the soil. A pile of broken sticks nearby, maybe for support, maybe for wiping. You crouch, balancing carefully, trying not to lean too far in any direction. Your ankles tingle. Your knees crackle like old parchment. You glance around, not for privacy, but for snakes. Because out here, everything has a shadow. This is rural sanitation in the Middle Ages. There's no pit dug, no structure built, no signage, just space. And the silent agreement that you don't go too close to where people cook, sleep, or draw water. Historians still debate how widespread designated privy areas were in medieval villages. In wealthier rural homes, you might find a wooden outhouse over a pit, emptied rarely and used often. But for most peasants, nature was the solution, and sometimes the problem. You finish. Use the softest leaf you can find. Not bad, actually. You've learned what to look for. Broad, dry, not shiny. And definitely not three-leaved. You bury what you can. Scatter some dirt. Stand slowly. Your thighs are sore, but your dignity is intact. You head back toward the house, stepping carefully around a log that looks suspiciously like it's done double duty. You wash your hands in a cold bucket of water. There's ash in it, an old trick. Ash cuts grease mask smell and makes you feel cleaner, even when it doesn't quite achieve the result. Breakfast is bread and something green in a pot. You don't ask. You eat. Across from you, an old woman chews slowly and says, "We don't use the south field anymore. Too many people forgot where they went." You nod solemnly. You make a mental note to never eat anything grown in the south field. Later that day, you see a child duck behind a shed with a sheepish look and a handful of straw. It's casual, routine, not shameful. Just another thing the body does between chores and mealtime. And that's what surprises you most. There's no embarrassment, no awkward cough, no excuse, just going and moving on. You realize how recent our obsession with bathroom privacy is. Doors, locks, flushing mechanisms, perfumes, and sprays. That's a modern comfort. In the medieval countryside, if you needed to go, you did. And if someone saw, well, so be it. Everyone's been there. Everyone's doing it. Some are probably doing it right now. There's a freedom in it. A crude, uncomfortable freedom. But freedom, nonetheless. You spend the rest of the day hauling firewood and trying to ignore the smell of the goat pen. It's strong, but now you can tell the difference between fresh, damp hay and the sharp, sour scent of where someone's been squatting. You're becoming fluent in medieval smells. When the stars come out, you sit near the fire with your hosts. Someone tells a story about a fox who stole a roast chicken and left a steaming deposit in the Lord's well. You all laugh, because in the end, nothing is too serious. When you've spent your morning squatting behind a bush, staring at a beetle, and hoping it doesn't crawl up instead of away. You're starting to notice the smells more now, not just the ones in the latrines or behind the sheds, but everywhere. Medieval life is pungent. Your nose has become a historian, learning the timeline of scents. Bread baking, damp straw, unwashed linen, sweat livestock ale, wood smoke, and yes, human waste. It's not all bad, but it's definitely all there. You walk through the village again, this time with a sharper nose. There's the sweet, sharp tang of the tannery at the edge of town. Animal skins soaked in urine and lime. You wrinkle your face, but the tanner waves proudly. Best in the Shire, he says. You nod politely. In the Middle Ages, urine was more than just a waste product. It was a cleaning agent, a medical diagnostic tool, and disturbingly, part of the fabric dyeing process. You learn this from the washerwoman who grins as she dunks a stained tunic into a bucket. Stale urine, she says. the best for lifting grease. Warmer the better. You don't ask what temperature this particular batch is. You ask where it came from. She shrugs. We all contribute. You think about every bucket you've seen, every pot in every corner. They're not just for show. In homes, alehouses, even churches, there's often a designated spot for night soil and chamber pot collection. Some of it is dumped into fields as fertilizer, some into streams, some left in pits until a brave soul empties it. Historians still argue whether these practices were born of necessity or laziness. But either way, sanitation was communal. You didn't own your waste. You shared it. In big cities like London, paid workers called gong farmers handled the worst jobs. They'd come at night emptying cesspits by hand, scooping sludge into barrels, and hauling it outside city walls. They were well paid, but deeply avoided. Smelled too much like their work. You pass a man pushing a cart full of barrels. He nods at you. The air shifts as he walks by. You don't breathe until he's gone. Further down the road, you spot a gutter. Just a narrow trench running alongside the homes designed to carry waste out of the street and into someone else's. This too was normal. In many medieval cities, residents were instructed to call out garde-loup before tossing waste from an upper window. It's from the French garde à l'eau, a warning to duck before the bucket flies. You stop near an old stone building with moss creeping up its base. Above you, a wooden window creaks open. Instinctively, you step back. Nothing falls. This time. You remember to look up before you walk anywhere now, especially near second-story windows. There's a tavern nearby, loud, full, alive. You step inside for a moment just to sit. But even here, the outhouse is outside, around the back. You ask the barkeep where it is. He points with his chin and says, "Don't use the one behind the stable. Rat problem." You raise your eyebrows. They don't bite, he adds, but they'll watch. Judgy little things. You decide you're not that desperate yet. Back outside, the sky is starting to dim. A woman sweeps refuse from her doorway. Bits of hay, crusts of bread, something wet you don't ask about into the street's edge gutter. She does it like breathing without effort or emotion. The street doesn't smell terrible, surprisingly. You realize your nose is adapting or giving up. You think about modern bathrooms, sealed, tiled, sanitized. A place you can be alone, safe, maybe even scroll your phone. Back here, it's all exposed, physical, participatory. And somehow that makes you feel more connected to them, these people, in this time. Their discomfort is your discomfort. Their relief is your relief. Even their jokes, especially the crude ones, are ones you've heard before. Because even across centuries, some things just don't change. You step carefully on the path home. The moon is rising. The wind is light. And the air, while still faintly barn-like, no longer offends you. You pull your cloak tighter and smile. You're starting to belong here. The next morning, you wake up with a mission. You're determined to find the nicest, medieval toilet in town. A strange quest, maybe, but after 3 days of crouching in fields, dodging rats and avoiding windowsill surprises, you're ready for a bit of luxury, even if that luxury is relative. You start with the church. They have stone walls, stained glass, and a certain divine air. Surely you think cleanliness is next to godliness. But when you ask the old priest where people relieve themselves, he looks puzzled. The graveyard, he says simply, and goes back to polishing a chalice. You blink. He sees your face and adds, "Behind the yew tree. We all use it." You decide to keep searching.
Next stop, the castle. You've heard they have garderobes, actual toilets, in the sense that there's a seat. You get permission to visit from the steward, and after climbing 3 winding staircases and ducking beneath 2 oddly low archways, you arrive. It's a narrow room, stone floor, small slit window for light, a smooth wooden bench with a round hole cut into it, built into the outer wall. You sit carefully and peer down, way down. You're essentially dangling over the open air, with your waist plummeting directly into the castle's moat, which explains the smell and the fact that no one fishes here. Still, this is progress. A seat, a wall, a view even. You feel oddly regal. Historians still debate how effective these garderobes were at maintaining hygiene. Some castles placed them directly over moats, while others used chutes that fed into cesspits.
There's evidence of communal cleaning days, where servants would literally shovel out the buildup, probably while swearing under their breath. This garderobe has no door, just a curtain. You draw it gently, but there's no mistaking what you're doing. A guard walks by and politely avoids eye contact. You return to the great hall lighter in spirit. And in other ways. You learn that castles often had multiple garderobes, some even built in pairs, side by side for social convenience. Yes, really. Medieval nobles might sit together, chatting while they relieved themselves, like a strange, echoing meeting room with fewer snacks. It's hard not to laugh. You visit the scribe next. His cottage is tucked behind the mill, small, neat, and filled with scrolls. He's a man who appreciates order. You ask about his facilities. He gestures toward a clay pot in the corner. You wait for him to laugh. He doesn't. "I empty it every evening," he says proudly. You glance at the pot. Then the scrolls. You silently pray. He keeps the lids on tight. He offers you a drink. You politely decline. As the day stretches on, you begin to understand that in medieval times, cleanliness wasn't just about where you went. It was about what you did afterward. Some people washed with water. Some used cloth. Others used moss, straw hay, or even broken pottery shards, which you will not be trying. In some monasteries, monks had designated wiping stones stored in clean water and reused. You wonder if they had names. "Have you seen Wipey? I left him soaking by the basil patch." You laugh alone at your own joke. The goats don't join in. Evening falls again. You sit by the hearth with some villagers, sipping something warm and vaguely alcoholic. Someone farts. No one flinches. You realize that the modern embarrassment around bodily functions just didn't exist in the same way back then. People joked, teased, complained, but they didn't hide. Waste was part of life, shared, smelly, and real. You excuse yourself to use the churchyard again. Behind the yew, the moonlight cuts shadows on the grass. A few others are already there. You nod in passing. There's no shame in it, just necessity. And maybe that's the most human thing of all. You wake to rain, not the polite kind that tiptoes across rooftops and vanishes by noon, but the determined sort that drums on thatch and soaks cloaks in minutes. You squint at the gray sky and listen to the wet squelch of footsteps as people go about their day unbothered. Because rain or not, life continues, and so does the need to relieve yourself. Today you discover what happens when medieval people can't just go outside. Because when the weather's foul, or you're in the middle of a feast, or you're simply too old or too sick to trudge behind a bush, there's always the humble chamber pot. You spot one beneath your bed. It's ceramic, cream-colored, and deceptively cheerful-looking. A rounded bowl with a curved handle. Harmless until you remember its job. You learn that in many homes these pots were standard. Everyone had one. Some even kept multiple one for the bedroom, one for guests, one strictly for number 2. You're not sure which yours is. You hope it's been washed. You carry it carefully to the back door, trying not to spill. Because yes, the next step is disposal. There are a few options. Some pour it into the garden, some into street-side gutters, and some just toss it hence, the infamous cries of Garde-Lou that once echoed through medieval cities before a pot's contents rained down on unsuspecting pedestrians. You peek out. No one's below. You tip pour and rinse it with a ladle of water. That's your sanitation. Back inside you sit with the weaver. She tells you that even high-born ladies use chamber pots, often adorned, painted, even personalized. Some bore inscriptions or rude poems. One noblewoman's pot, historians note, had a picture of her least favorite cousin painted at the bottom. You can't decide if that's petty or genius. She also shows you a cloth wrap called a clout, used as padding, washable, reusable, and by the smell used often. Cloth was precious, so nothing was thrown away lightly. A clout could be a diaper, a wound, dressing a menstrual pad, or, as in this case, an unfortunate stand-in for toilet paper. Historians still debate how frequently people changed their linens in the Middle Ages. Wealthier households may have had weekly routines while the poor often went longer, especially during winter when laundering was a full-day freezing endeavor. You wander next to the alehouse. The drink is cheap, the floor is sticky, and the patrons are jolly in that unwashed, nose-blind way that makes you wonder how anyone keeps track of their own scent. You chat with the barkeep who tells you the back alley doubles as a urinal after sunset. Just follow the warmth, he jokes and laughs loudly at your face. You decide not to follow the warmth, but it makes sense. Alehouses were packed. Privacy was rare. After enough drinks, people would relieve themselves wherever convenient, against walls, in barrels, even in fireplaces if the stories are true. The barkeep tells you of a man who peed into his own shoe and didn't notice until morning. You pretend to laugh. Quietly check your own shoes. As the rain keeps falling, the streets turn slick with more than just water. You realize that drainage is a constant problem. Some cities had stone gutters and sewer grates, but most places relied on gravity and good luck. And when that failed, they relied on apprentices. The lowest-ranking workers or servants were often tasked with sweeping waste into ditches or digging fresh cesspits. You meet one such boy, a red-haired lad with a mop and a look of eternal betrayal. Your job, you ask. He nods solemnly. I chase poop. You pat his shoulder. He does not smile. And still, amid all of this, there's a rhythm. People go. People clean. People joke about it. There are rules unwritten, perhaps, but respected. You don't dump near the well. You don't relieve yourself where the chickens feed. And if you're visiting someone's home, you always ask where to empty your pot. Basic manners. You head home that night, boots muddy, pot clean. You place it gently beneath the bed, feeling oddly grateful for this simple bowl, for the privacy of four walls, for not having to slip down a hill in the dark and reappear smelling worse than the goat pen. You pull your blanket close and let the rain sing you to sleep. Your dreams are weirdly clean. It's market day, and you're determined to learn how people dealt with bathroom needs when away from home. Because it's one thing to have a designated chamber pot under your bed, but what happens when you're miles away, haggling over turnips and sheep wool in a crowded medieval square? You walk through the bustle, dodging carts, muddy dogs, and someone shouting about radishes. The air is rich with spices, smoke, and something less poetic, an undercurrent of humanity that reminds you where you are and what you're looking for. You scan the edges of the market square. No stalls labeled toilet. No signs. No helpful modern conveniences. So you ask. A butcher waves his cleaver vaguely. Behind the smithy he grunts. You find it. It's not a building, not even a hut. Just a low stone wall, half hidden behind a shed littered with hay and well evidence. Someone tied a piece of cloth to a branch to offer a shred of privacy, but it flaps uselessly in the breeze. You wait your turn with a few others. Nobody speaks. Because in the Middle Ages, when nature called in public, you simply went in public. Behind trees, in corners, along hedgerows. The idea of designated public restrooms didn't really take off until much later. Historians still argue whether markets had any official sanitary policies. Some suggest there were fines for public urination, but enforcement was rare. More often the mess was tolerated until it became unbearable, and then someone shoveled it away. You watch a woman shake out her skirt and walk back into the crowd. No one bats an eye. Further down the road, you spot a row of small wooden stalls, lean-tos, built into the wall of a guild hall. They're not shops. They're for sitting. Crude toilets with planks over pits, open to the air and painted with faint symbols, moons, stars, circles. The origin of our bathroom symbols. Maybe. Historians debate that too. You approach one and peek inside. It's not clean, but it's something. There's a jug of water beside the door and a stick with a rag tied to it. You recognize it now, a medieval toilet brush. You decide not to touch it. A man passes by and sees you hesitate. Better than squatting in a puddle, he says, and continues on. Hard to argue. You make a note if you ever build a time machine. Bring hand sanitizer. You return to the market just in time to see a group of children giggling as they tip a small bucket behind a food stall. The vendor yells after them. They run. And you begin to realize that public hygiene wasn't just a matter of infrastructure. It was a matter of custom behavior and sometimes chaos. You talk to a merchant selling dried fish. He tells you that his guild imposes a strict no waste near wares rule. If a member violates it, they're fined a day's wages. But he shrugs. Only if they're caught. You wander further past the tanneries and stables where the smells grow stronger. Here, even animals have better facilities. Dedicated dung heaps, cleared regularly by boys with spades and long-suffering expressions. You wave to one. He waves back with his shovel. Back home, you reflect on your day. You've learned that medieval public toileting was a patchwork of individual choices, social norms, and sheer pragmatism. If it worked, it worked. If it didn't, someone would deal with it, eventually. You sit by the hearth again that night, warming your feet. Someone brings out a pot of stew. You don't ask where it was cooked. You don't ask who last used the ladle. You just eat. Because if there's one thing medieval people mastered, it's making peace with discomfort. And for all the filth and awkwardness, there's a strange charm to it. A raw, earthy honesty. No pretense. No porcelain thrones. Just people doing what they must. You smile as you rinse your own chamber pot for the night. Because somehow, this world makes sense now. By now, you've accepted the rhythms of medieval hygiene, or the lack thereof. But today brings something new. You're invited to a feast at the manor. Not a humble meal of turnips and ale, but a real banquet. Meat, music, nobles with fancy sleeves and opinions. You clean your boots, comb your hair with fingers, and pray the goat doesn't follow you. The manor stands proud, its stone walls streaked with moss, its banners flapping with mild grandeur. Inside it smells of roasted game beeswax candles and a faint whiff of something else, something familiar. You're shown to a long wooden bench, seated among people who have never heard of deodorant and yet carry themselves like perfume bottles. Dinner begins. There's boar, pigeon pie, apples stewed in honey. Everyone digs in with fingers occasionally, passing shared knives and dipping bread into communal sauces. No forks. Napkins, your sleeve will do. You eat cautiously, cheeks puffed with politeness, and then you notice something no one gets up to leave. Hours pass, plates are cleared, trays arrive, but not a single person excuses themselves to use the toilet. You nudge your neighbor, a plump man with a tunic too tight. "Where's the place to go?" He smirks. "You mean the Jakes? Outside right by the stables?" But don't worry. Most folks just wait till they get home. You blink. That's a long time. He leans in. Or he whispers some have pots under the table. You check beneath your bench. Just shoes. Phew. Historians still argue whether guests at grand feasts really used hidden chamber pots or simply held it in. There are references to discreet servants removing pots mid-meal, but no one recorded the sounds, probably for the best. One lady excuses herself. A servant follows. She returns 15 minutes later, looking lighter and more smug. You make mental notes. Eventually you step outside, wandering the gardens, and there it is, a freestanding wooden outhouse perched over a cesspit. It's shaped like a tiny tower, complete with a pointed roof, and, get this, a padded seat. Luxury. You climb in, latch the wooden door, and sit. You hear laughter from the house. Smell roasting meat on the breeze. Somewhere nearby, a cow moos judgmentally. It's strangely peaceful. You learn later that some wealthy households built multi-seat privies stacked vertically across floors, with chutes leading waist downward. The bottom servant was often assigned cesspit duty, an unspoken horror. You wonder what their job titles were. Even in the manor, waste was a problem. Cesspits overflowed, odors wafted, rats multiplied. Some estates paid workers to empty pits into carts and wheel it outside the city if they had a city. And don't get romantic about castles. Even royal palaces had sanitation issues. Henry VIII's court, for all its splendor, stank in summer. His engineers designed complex plumbing, but the smell outran the innovation. Back at your cottage that night, you squat outside under the stars. Familiar grass, familiar rock, familiar breeze on your rear. And you realize, for all the discomfort, there's a strange simplicity here. No toilets to clog, no paper to run out, no signs to read. Just you, the earth, and an occasional goat watching too closely. You wake up sore from last night's feast, too much meat, too little walking, and possibly a bit too much mead. Your stomach churns with medieval resentment. You sit up and realize something's urgent. You clutch your belly and dash outside. The early light is kind. The grass is wet. The goat is watching again. Later, once you've recovered and returned to a standing, dignified version of yourself, you decide to investigate what happened when people in the Middle Ages didn't just need a quick visit to the bush, but got sick, stomach sick. Because if going to the bathroom is awkward in normal times, it's a full-blown crisis when your body decides to mutiny. You visit the local herbalist. She's got a crooked smile, dozens of pouches tied around her waist, and enough dried leaves in her hut to start a wildfire with a sneeze. She gives you a sprig of mint to chew, says it calms the churning. You chew it like a nervous goat. She also gives you something else, a little stone bottle filled with liquid, so bitter it makes your toes curl. A purge, she says cheerfully. Because here's the thing, medieval medicine believed illness, especially of the stomach, was caused by imbalance. You ate too much wet food, or too much hot food, or too much of anything during a waning moon while Mercury was grumpy. So, treatment often meant getting it all out. Historians still argue whether these purges helped or simply dehydrated already sick patients. But it's clear many people swore by them. Vomiting good, diarrhea encouraged. Better out than in, they believed. You hold the bottle. You're not sure if you're brave or desperate. You take a sip. Later, much later, you crawl back to the herbalist's doorstep, pale but oddly peaceful. Your body has nothing left to give. She pats your back like a well-behaved donkey and mutters something about wormwood. Wormwood, it turns out, was used for stomach complaints, parasites, and occasional exorcisms, just in case your symptoms were caused by demons, which honestly feels plausible at this point. She also shows you other cures, dried chamomile steeped and sipped slowly, charcoal ground into a gritty powder, even burnt toast scraped into ash, eaten to soak up poisons. You ask if anyone ever just rested. She shrugs. Not if there's sheep to shear. Because sickness didn't excuse you from chores. Unless you were near death, you were expected to keep working, or at least sit by the fire and mend socks. Especially if you were poor. In wealthier homes, the sick might be moved to a separate chamber, given broth, given clean linens, given prayers. You hear about one nobleman who demanded his privy be moved next to his bed. It wasn't pretty. You visit the carpenter. He shows you a portable stool with a hole in it. Yes, really, a kind of early commode. For when you can't make it outside, he explains. You ask if it's comfortable. He raises an eyebrow. It's got a hole. Fair enough. You learn that some monasteries had full infirmaries with beds lined up like sleepy dominoes and monks tending quietly to patients. They kept records, 2 notes, about who had stomach cramps, what they ate, how often they vomited. Some entries are surprisingly detailed and alarmingly casual. You're shown one note, Brother Aldred's bowels remain vigorous. Pray for his recovery. You do, silently, for both of you. As you walk back through the village, you see signs of sick rooms, cloths tied on doors, buckets left outside. People speak in hushed tones. It wasn't just privacy, it was fear, because stomach sickness could spread quickly. One spoiled fish, one contaminated well, and half the village could end up crouching in misery. Which is why water was rarely drunk straight. Ale was safer. So was wine. Even weak versions, small ale, were boiled during brewing, killing off many dangers. It's also why so many people were tipsy all the time. By evening you feel better. You sip water that's been boiled. You nibble on barley bread. You nod politely to the goat. And you make a mental note in the Middle Ages. Surviving food was one thing. Surviving what it did to you was another. By now you've learned to listen to your body the way medieval people did with mild dread and a handful of herbs. But what about when it wasn't your body acting up? What if it was someone else's? Tonight you're on watch duty. Your neighbor's child has fallen ill, and the village takes turns sitting through the night in case the fever worsens. You're not trained. You're not qualified. But in this time, caring is mostly about presence and warm broth. You sit in a creaky chair by the hearth, listening to the child's breathing, shallow, then deeper, then shallow again. His skin burns like sun-touched stone. You lay a damp cloth across his forehead. Someone hands you a bowl of onions. To soak up the sickness, they whisper. You place it near the boy's head. It smells like regret. In the Middle Ages, illness was often seen as something floating in the air. Miasma, bad air, swampy, and invisible was blamed for fevers, coughs, and almost anything that made you sweat or groan. Onions, herbs, and even bundles of flowers were kept nearby, hoping to trap the evil vapors before they entered the body. Historians still argue whether these methods offered psychological comfort or real relief, likely both. At the foot of the bed, someone lights a bit of rosemary. Smoke curls upward. The smell is sharp, earthy, not unpleasant. You find yourself breathing easier, not because it's healing, but because you're doing something. When the child moans, someone offers him water laced with honey to cool the fire inside, they say. You hold the cup to his lips, and he sips like a bird. They also tie red thread around his wrist. Superstition, maybe, but no one questions it. And then comes the whisper, should we bleed him? You freeze. Because bloodletting was a common treatment, still is, in this time. The belief is simple. Too much blood causes imbalance. Let some out and the fever goes with it. You don't like it. You imagine slicing a line on that fragile arm. You imagine the child's mother watching. You imagine the tremble in your own hand. You shake your head. Not yet. Someone nods. The decision stands. Tonight, you pass the hours wiping sweat, humming lullabies, whispering to the walls. You remember what the herbalist told you earlier. Sickness leaves when it's bored. You hope that's true. Eventually, dawn seeps through the shutters. The child stirs, opens one eye, murmurs something about bread. The fever has broken. You laugh softly. Others sigh. Someone cries. You all smell like onions and soot. But in that moment, you feel powerful. Because in a world without antibiotics, without thermometers, without any clear answers, survival comes down to care instinct and community. The child's mother hugs you. You pretend not to cry. The goat outside bleats approval. Back in your own home, you collapse into sleep. And in your dreams, you hear chanting. Because not every village relied on onions and honey. Some turn to prayer, healing masses, pilgrimages to holy wells. Water from St. Winifred's spring was said to cure rashes, fevers, even blindness if you believed hard enough. You once saw someone bathe in it, muttering pleas to saints you'd never heard of. Some monasteries even had relics, bones, cloth, or vials of something brown and sacred kept in locked boxes and brought out when sickness grew too bold. People lined up, hopeful, desperate, grateful. Faith here is as strong as medicine, sometimes stronger. You wake in late morning sore but satisfied. The world feels kinder, because despite all the filth, the fear and the fumbling guesses, you've seen something good. People trying, people staying up all night for a child, people believing even when they didn't understand. You light a candle for the boy and one for yourself, just in case. You wake to the sound of hooves on dirt and a bell ringing faintly in the distance. It's market day, but it's not the chickens or the cheese you're curious about. This time it's the healers, the traveling ones. Quacks, some call them. Miracle workers, others swear. Snake oil salesmen, if they had snakes or oil. But whatever you name them, they always draw a crowd. You head toward the square, where a man in a ragged green robe is already shouting over the heads of a dozen villagers. He's got wild eyes, a wooden crate for a stage, and an assistant with teeth too white to be natural. You arrive just in time to hear guaranteed to cure fever, flatulence, and bad luck in love. He raises a jar filled with something green and wobbly. It jiggles ominously. You squint. Could be herbs, could be frogs, could be both. You lean over to the butcher's wife and whisper, "Does it work?" She shrugs. "Cured my sister's cough." "Wasn't she dead?" "Exactly. No more coughing." You make a note not to buy the green stuff. Still you hang around. Because these traveling healers carry more than potions. They carry stories. One speaks of a land across the sea where people drink silver and never fall ill. Another swears by bear fat rubbed on the soles of the feet. One sells tiny scrolls meant to be swallowed whole. Historians still argue whether these wandering medics spread real remedies or just rumors, but they were part of the medieval medical network, colorful, chaotic, occasionally criminal. You walk past a table covered in trinkets, leeches in jars, powders wrapped in linen, carved charms shaped like saints. One boy buys a rabbit's foot. He looks proud. The rabbit presumably less so. At another stall, a woman offers dream readings to diagnose hidden illness. You describe a dream about falling into a pit filled with eels and bread. She nods solemnly. "You're eating too many lentils." Fair enough. You finally stop at the apothecary booth. This one looks more serious. Glass vials, neatly arranged herbs, tied with twine, a mortar and pestle, worn smooth from use. The woman behind it wears a dark cloak and eyes like storm clouds. You ask about stomach pain. She gives you a pinch of dried peppermint and a recipe for barley broth. Also, she adds, "Boil your water." You nod. Then she lowers her voice. But if your neighbor has the same pain, it might be the well. Suddenly everything feels a little less quaint, because sanitation, even in the Middle Ages, was more than just going to the bathroom. It was about water sources, waste disposal, and how quickly sickness could spread through a shared jug. Wells were precious and dangerous. Springs were sacred, but not always safe. And rainwater, though fresh, had to be caught and stored properly, or it became a haven for insects and filth. One noble estate, you're told, had a well poisoned, either by accident or revenge. The result, a month of mourning and a very suspicious goat. You look down at your hands, remembering you touched that same well bucket this morning. You go by soap root. As you wander home, pockets full of dubious cures and slightly more wary than before, you notice a group of children playing near the stream. One falls in. The others laugh. You rush forward, not because of danger, but because the stream's downstream from the tannery. And suddenly you understand something very old and very real. In a world without sewage systems, every stream is a gamble. Every well is a question. Every cup of water is a roll of the dice. You sit down on a rock, sipping weak ale instead, and think medieval survival wasn't just about resisting sickness. It was about avoiding it altogether, which, as it turns out, was the hardest part. By now your pockets jingle with dried herbs, suspicious powders, and at least 3 charms you're not sure you believe in, but won't throw away just in case. You smell faintly of sage, onion, and fear. Today you decide to go where most villagers avoid, unless they have no choice. You're going to see the plague house. You don't go alone. The old miller's son walks beside you, his eyes forward, his mouth closed tight. He doesn't say much, just nods toward a narrow path, veiled by hanging branches, the kind that brush your shoulders like the forest is trying to hold you back. You follow anyway. The air grows still. The birds fall silent. Even the flies seem hesitant. The house appears suddenly more a scar in the land than a building, half sunken, crooked, overrun with vines and moss. One shutter hangs at a lazy angle. The others are nailed shut. On the door, faded but still visible, a red cross smeared with old chalk, or maybe blood. No one has cleaned it. No one dares. The house once held a family. 5 people, all gone now. You stand at the edge of the path. Your boots press into soft soil. Part of you wants to look inside. Another part wants to run. You listen instead to the silence, the wind, the imagined coughs, echoing behind those wooden walls. Quarantine in the Middle Ages wasn't romantic. It wasn't organized. There were no hospitals with clean sheets or sympathetic nurses. Just fear and boards and doors that didn't open again. Sometimes villagers brought food, set it on the doorstep, and knocked. Sometimes no one came to collect it, and eventually they stopped knocking. Historians still argue whether these lockdowns helped or harmed, whether the fear protected the many at the cost of the few, or whether it simply spread the dying more slowly. You take a step closer. The air changes. It smells old, like wood smoke and rot and something faintly metallic. You imagine a child once sat by that window, coughing into a blanket, staring out, hoping someone might wave back. Maybe they did. Maybe no one looked at all. The miller's son whispers, "They say you can still hear them at night." You glance over. He's grinning. Probably lying, huh? Hopefully lying. You both laugh, though it doesn't feel natural. Your walk back is faster than the one there. Back in the village, you pass a bucket filled with vinegar and rosemary outside a doorway. A bundle of dried lavender hangs above a window. A little girl has a necklace of garlic around her neck. Her mother tightens it gently. Fear lives in the air like dust. At the edge of the square, the friar waits beside a table covered in old scrolls, jars of ink, and a large leather-bound book that smells like mildew and secrets. He gestures you over, smiling with cracked lips. You sit beside him as he opens the book. Inside are drawings, medieval art at its most honest. People bleeding, people dying, people praying. Some pages are stained, others are torn. One shows a group of masked men marching through a town. Another shows a man kneeling beneath a great shadow, shaped like a rat. The friar explains that sickness wasn't just biological. It was moral, a test, a punishment, a divine warning. People confess their sins not to clear their conscience, but to cure their boils. Healing in this time was rarely clean. Sometimes it involved bleeding, sometimes fire, sometimes just hoping very, very hard. Flagellants, men and women who walked barefoot from village to village, lashed themselves with ropes and branches, crying out for mercy, trying to absorb everyone's guilt with each drop of blood. Some towns welcomed them. Others barred the gates. You ask the friar what he does when he's sick. He shrugs. Pray. Drink hot wine. Sleep near the fire. You nod. That's more helpful than leeches. Later, you stop at the apothecary's stall. She's old, bent, and smells like fennel. Her hands are stained green. She offers you a mixture of mint marigold and crushed snail shell. For coughs, she says. Who's anyone's? She chuckles at her own joke. You buy it anyway? As you leave, she hands you a small wax tablet with a saint's face pressed into it. Keep it under your pillow, she says, for dreams, and maybe for luck. The next street over, you pass a family burning old straw bedding in a fire pit. Another family sprinkles ash over their doorstep. The baker wears a necklace of beads and tiny bones. His wife washes her hands in cider. Everyone has their rituals. Everyone hopes theirs will work. At the well, a boy dips a bucket. A woman stops him. She pours vinegar into the bucket before he pulls it up, just in case. A month ago, someone thought the well was cursed. It wasn't, but for 7 days, no one drank, and still people fell ill, because disease in this time isn't just a fear, it's a fog It creeps into your hair and your clothes and your breath. It rides on whispers, on market stalls, on coins. You walk past the blacksmith's. He's sharpening a blade while coughing. You glance away. That night the church bell rings, not for mass, for death. Another home closes its shutters. You sit at the edge of your bed, your hands smelling faintly of lavender and smoke. You've eaten the garlic. You've drank the herbs. You've prayed. And you've still got the tablet under your pillow. You listen to the night. And you wonder, not for the first time, if that's enough. The days after a death always feel quieter. Not just because someone is missing, but because everyone else moves a little slower, speaks a little softer, as if afraid they might be next. You wake to a village that's unusually subdued. The market stalls open late. The baker doesn't sing this morning. Even the chickens seem to cluck under their breath. You step outside and notice a new bundle of herbs nailed to your neighbor's door frame. Mugwort, maybe, or wormwood, hard to tell. It's joined by a scrap of red cloth, tied there by someone in the night, perhaps as a ward or a warning, or maybe both. In the Middle Ages, superstition and medicine weren't enemies. They were dance partners. For every herbal poultice, there was a whispered chant. For every wound dressed, a prayer was muttered. If a patient lived, it was divine favor. If they died, it was fate or someone's fault. Historians still argue whether this blending of belief and care made people more resilient or more vulnerable. Maybe both. Maybe it gave comfort when science couldn't. You pass by the midwife's cottage. Today she's tending to a man with a broken leg and a festering cut. No gloves, no mask, just grit and honey. She ties the wound with linen that's been boiled in wine, then presses a warm stone to the man's forehead. Her hands are steady. Her eyes are tired. She sees you and smiles faint but kind. You wave, but don't go closer. You're not sure if that's for your safety or hers. The man she's helping groans. You wonder if he'll survive. Later that morning, you find yourself by the river. It's where people sometimes go when they want to be alone, or clean, or cry. A young woman washes clothes nearby, scrubbing hard, her sleeves rolled up to the elbows. She has a bruise under one eye and doesn't make eye contact. You don't ask, you just nod and keep walking. A little farther down, you spot a group of boys throwing pebbles into the current. They're arguing about whether swimming in cold water makes you healthier or sick. One insists the cold kills all the bad spirits. Another says his uncle swam last winter and coughed blood for a week. You let them debate. Honestly, both could be right. You think about how often people got sick for reasons no one understood. Bad air, they said, or imbalanced humors, or divine punishment. Some blamed the weather. Others blamed Jews, witches, foreigners, anyone who looked or lived differently. And sometimes they blamed the sick themselves. There's an old woman who hasn't left her hut in weeks. Some say she brought illness with her when she came from the north. Others say she's just sad. You saw her once through her window, rocking slowly, whispering to herself. She didn't look dangerous, just hollow. Back in the village, the children are playing with bones again. Not real ones, probably just carved wood and sheep's knuckles. But it makes you pause. One child pretends to be a healer, holding a spoonful of mud over a doll with painted sores. Another child pretends to die dramatically, rolling into the dirt tongue, out arms stiff. They laugh. You don't, because that's the thing about sickness in this world. It's always close enough to touch, but just out of reach to understand. A man walks by, selling toadstools, claims they cure sadness and lung rot. A woman sells bundles of feathers dipped in vinegar. Wave it in the air, she says, and no plague can catch you. Someone else offers a rat skull on a string. You shake your head politely. Still, part of you wonders if any of it works. At twilight, the friar gathers people in the square. He lights a tall candle and begins to chant. A procession forms, slow, steady, mournful. They carry torches and dried leaves. You join without speaking. Together, you walk the length of the village and back. No one speaks of the person who died yesterday, but you all walk slower as you pass that house. Someone leaves a slice of bread on the doorstep. Someone else mutters a name you don't catch. As night falls, the village exhales. Doors shut gently, candles flicker in windows. Somewhere a dog whines once and goes quiet. You sit outside your own doorway a while longer, watching the stars. You wonder what healing means in a time like this. Not just survival. Maybe it's patience. Maybe it's kindness. Maybe it's making space for someone to cry without being shamed. Maybe it's carrying soup to a neighbor's doorstep, even when you're scared. Maybe it's believing that even when you can't fix things, you can soften them. That night you sleep with the wax tablet still under your pillow. And when you dream, the ghost of sickness passes by your window, but doesn't stop. Not tonight. Morning comes slow and silver, with the light filtering through wooden shutters like a whispered promise. You wake before the rooster crows, not because you have to, but because something feels different. The air carries a quietness that isn't dread for once, just stillness, a kind of peace that feels earned. You rise and move through the room, your joints stiff, your breath warm. You check the wax tablet under your pillow, still there. The saint's face has smudged a little from the heat of your dreams, but maybe that just means he was working. Outside, the village is beginning to stir, not rushed, not anxious, just awake. The baker has lit his oven early today. The smell of bread floats through the air, strong and yeasty, with just the faintest char from yesterday's ash. A good sign. People always bake more when they think tomorrow will come. You stroll slowly to the market square. On the way, you pass the house with the shuttered windows, the one with the sickness. The door is open, and a woman sweeps the threshold. She wears a veil, and her eyes are tired, but she's sweeping, She pauses once to lean on the broom, sees you watching, nods. You nod back. Nothing needs to be said. Elsewhere, the apothecary is refilling jars. The friar is unrolling parchment in the sun to air it out. A group of children are drawing flowers with burnt sticks on a wall. Some of the flowers have too many petals. Some look like suns. One looks like a very determined chicken. You smile. Later, you help rebuild a section of fence that collapsed in the storm 2 nights ago. It has nothing to do with sickness, but everything to do with living. You think of the countless times you've seen people gather not to cure each other, but to carry burdens, to tell stories, to laugh anyway. Historians still argue whether medieval communities were tight-knit out of necessity or choice, whether shared suffering made them stronger or just more dependent. But from where you're standing holding a plank of wood in one hand and a nail in the other, it doesn't really matter. They showed up. You end the day back at your door, legs, sore hands, splintered. A young boy runs by wearing a tunic 3 sizes too big. You recognize it as one donated by the friar last winter. The boy grins at you. You grin back. Dinner is simple. A broth made with onion stale bread and a bit of salt pork. You chew slowly. It's not much, but it warms you. That night, as the sky folds itself into deep blue velvet and the stars blink open, one by one you lie in bed and let the rhythm of the day echo in your chest. There's no miracle cure, no grand invention, no magic plant that saves the village. There's just small acts, cautious hope, and enough garlic to scare off a battalion. And sometimes that's enough. Now, as your thoughts begin to drift and your eyelids grow heavy, picture yourself in that quiet medieval village again. The fire has burned low to embers. The shutters are drawn. The soft scrape of broom bristles has faded to memory. There's only the hush of wind through the trees and the occasional rustle of hay in the loft. You're wrapped in a blanket that smells faintly of lavender and wood smoke. The wax tablet under your pillow presses gently against your cheek, a small charm in a big, unpredictable world. Your breath is slow, steady. The ache in your muscles is the kind that only comes from honest work. In the distance, the bell tower stands still, no tolling tonight. Just silence. Blessed, reassuring silence. Even in a time with no real cures, no antiseptic, no antibiotics, people found ways to endure, to sit with one another in the hardest moments, to say prayers even when they weren't sure anyone was listening, to whisper comfort to a feverish child, to carry a bowl of soup to a doorstep, to keep the fire going. And now it's your turn to rest. Whatever you carry, whatever aches in your mind or heart, leave it by the door for now. You've done enough, more than enough. Breathe in, let it out, slowly. You're safe. You're home. Sleep well.